Let's now turn our attention to our other top focus. It's taken the chilling death of a 3-year-old adopted from India for the government to begin fixing the loopholes in the country's adoption procedures and promise changes in the law. Here's more on that. A day after India's Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj sought a probe into adopted Indian girl Sharon Matthews' death in the United States, India's Women and Child Development Minister Maneka Gandhi has promised to change Indian adoption laws soon. The agency behind Sharon's adoption will now be blacklisted.
इसका जो होम स्टडी है हम पूरा बदल रहे हैं इसी केस के आधार लेकर के होम स्टडीज भी बदल रहे हैं यहाँ भी विदेश में भी जिसने होम स्टडी किया था अमेरिका में उनको हम ब्लैकलिस्ट कर रहे हैं पूरा इस पर सारे कानून बदलवाए जा रहे हैं
India's foreign ministry had earlier said that passports will be issued for children adopted from India only after approval from the Ministry of Women and Child Development. 3-year-old Sharon Matthews was adopted last year from India and taken to the United States by Indian-American couple Wesley Matthews and Sini Matthews. Her adoptive father, Wesley Matthews, had reported her missing from near Dallas on October 7th. Initially, the father had told the police that his daughter went missing after he asked her to stand outside their house at 3 a.m. as punishment for not drinking her milk, only to change his statement after Sharon's body was found in a drain days later, then claiming that he saw her die choking on milk, and admitted to moving her body from the family's home in Texas. He was arrested for causing felony injury to a child. Anger has been simmering back home, with activists in India calling for an immediate end to inter-country adoptions, which they say fail to protect children. The government's promise to change adoption laws brings hope that tragic cases like Sharon's will not be repeated. Bureau Report, WION. Sharon Matthews was adopted by the Matthews 2 years ago from an orphanage in India's Bihar state. Let's now take a look at some of the stipulations of the adoption laws for overseas adoptions of Indian children. WION's Jessica Taneja breaks it down for you. Take a look.
The tragic story of 3-year-old Sharon Matthews is a classic case of adoption gone wrong. She was adopted from an orphanage in India in 2016 and taken to the US, where a year later, Sharon ended up dead on the watch of her adoptive father. So does it ultimately boil down to adoption laws in India? As per the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act of 1956, all resident Indians, overseas citizens of India, and foreigners are eligible to adopt an Indian child. In India, there is no separate act that governs adoption by foreign citizens or non-resident Indians, but it is covered under the Guidelines Governing Adoption of Children 2015. Under these guidelines, misuse or illegal use of children through adoption is prevented. As per the Supreme Court Guidelines for Inter-Country Adoption, a foreign parent can adopt an Indian child before he or she turns 3. In the absence of any concrete act on inter-country adoption, the provisions of Guardians and Wards Act 1890 are followed. The Guardians and Wards Act 1890 remains silent about the adoption of an orphan, while the Juvenile Justice Act spells out a detailed procedure for adoption, entailing accountability, transparency, and audit of children being adopted. Adoption under the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act is quite simple. To legalize an adoption, one does not even need a court order. Wary of the stringent rules under the Juvenile Justice Act, adoption agencies, as well as prospective adoptive parents, prefer the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act. The lineal provisions of adoption under the Act have resulted in touts misusing them, leading to illegal adoption and even trafficking of children. As per the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, of the nearly 10,000 childcare institutions in India, more than half of them are unregistered, and only a little over 2,300 are registered under the Juvenile Justice Act, pointing to the prevalence of illegal adoption and even trafficking from childcare institutions. There has been long pending demand for making the Juvenile Justice Act the governing law for adoption, and doing away with adoption under the Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. Compare this to adoption laws in the US, where adoptive parents obtain the same rights and responsibilities with respect to the child that biological parents typically have, and the parental relationship is not subject to revocation. Australian laws mandate transparency and contact with birth families to be maintained wherever possible. Russia has banned adoptions by US parents in 2012, and South Korea adoption laws disallowed adoption, which saw a rise in abandoned babies. India can follow suit and implement rigorous laws to prevent illegal adoption and save many children from being homeless. With Jessica Taneja, Anisya Kumar for WION.
Let's open this up. We're now joined in by Aishwarya Bharti, an advocate with the Indian Supreme Court, and Bureau Chief from London, Mandy Clark. Coming to you first, Ms. Bharti, there have been long pending demands for making the Juvenile Justice Act as the governing law for adoptions in India and do away with adoption under the Hindu Adoption as well as the Maintenance Act. Is that the key to fixing the many loopholes in adoption laws in our country, and should India take a cue from adoption laws in other countries?
Actually, now adoption in India is no longer governed by personal laws. It is governed by the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015. In fact, CARA guidelines have been laid down in accordance with the Juvenile Justice Act, as also the guidelines of the Supreme Court. In fact, personal law used to govern this issue earlier. And, interestingly, India does not have a uniform civil code. So our, the issue of adoption is a civil right, and that has been governed by our personal laws. Now, another very interesting point is, under the personal laws, it's only the Hindu personal law that allowed adoption or had a mechanism of adoption. Other personal laws, Muslims, Christians, Parsis, they did not have any provision of adoption, and the only provision under which they could a child of other faith other than Hindu could have taken a child under a guardianship was the Guardianship and Wards Act of 1890.
Right.
And that act did not allow a full-fledged adoption, but the parent could only be a guardian of the ward that they would take under them. But thankfully, this is an issue which has not waited for the Uniform Civil Code to come in.
Right.
Thanks to the Juvenile Justice Act of 2015, as also the Supreme Court guidelines, after which CARA has come in. Now this is one area which is governed by gender neutral as also religion neutral laws, and it's no longer so. There is no now there is no adoption possible under the personal laws, even Hindu personal laws, and the only way that adoption can happen is under the CARA guidelines in terms of the Juvenile Justice Act.
Ms. Bharti, that is what the law states, but there seems to be a huge gaping hole when it comes to implementation and also exploitation of the loopholes in the law. What do you feel needs to be done, and what is the urgent need of the hour when we look at the revamp of adoption laws in our country?
See, I don't think, this is a very sad case that we have seen, but one, case like this should not allow us to have a knee-jerk reaction on an issue. This is a very sensitive issue.
Sure.
On the one hand, we have children who are abandoned by parents or orphan children, and they are in the need of care. On the other hand, we have couples or families who want to adopt these children, give them homes, and at the same time, there is a threat of, child trafficking, which is a very real threat at the same time. So it is a very tight rope. There can't be really very clear yeses and no's on this. And I also personally feel that just because, we have seen a really bad case of, where a heinous crime has been committed, we should allow law to take its course on this issue. And we have seen even natural parents indulging in crimes against their natural children. It is not it is an aberration, of course, but it is not an unheard of thing. And when that kind of thing can happen with natural parents, crimes will be there. Laws cannot prevent commission of crimes. But the mechanism should be it should be regulated and implemented in a manner so as to minimize the crimes to have happened, and also to ensure that if a crime happens, then it should be dealt with an iron hand, so that it does not become a loophole or a gaping hole for others to follow suit.
Just hold that thought there, Ms. Bhatti. Coming back across to you. First, let's get in a quick update from our London Bureau Chief, Mandy Clark, who's also standing by. Mandy, if we take a closer look and compare adoption laws in our country with those across the world, as that earlier report just pointed out the contrast, India does have a lot to learn. India's minister has also pointed out there will be a revamp. What examples does the UK have to offer?
Well, the UK is not generally a country of origin when it comes to inter-country adoption. And that there's a number of reasons. It has a healthy welfare state, so if parents need more money, they can simply be able to hold on to their children. A lot of children that are in this system suffer from sexual abuse and suffer severe disabilities, and the UK law does not really allow people from other countries to adopt. They must have some relation to a child or the UK residents abroad. So they're pretty strict on the way they do their adoption. But the circumstances are very different. The children in care certainly have complex needs, and it would require someone to have a lot of ability to deal with those complex needs. Where in India, you know, the description of Sharon, she was a very happy child. She didn't have a lot of needs, and these are the type of children in general that most people want to adopt. They don't. So it's a different system, a different model. But certainly there's a lot of background checks in any adoption with Britain. There's criminal records checks. The adoption process can take 1 to 2 years, just making sure that the right family is the right fit, because they don't want any mistakes.
Any mistakes should be avoided. That brings me to the next point of lessons that we do learn from this tragedy, Ms. Bhatti. You have outlined what the law states, but there seems to be something that has gone seriously wrong in terms of the loopholes that have been exploited. That agency behind the adoption now stands to be blacklisted. India's Women and Child Development Minister has said there will be a revamp. What, according to you, needs to be done to ensure that such cases do not erupt in the near future?
See, I don't think we should have a system where we do not allow adoption outside of the country, because the realities of India are very different, and also there are so many children who are happy with with adopted parents across the world. Indian children are there across the world. They are adopted by parents and they are very happy. So I don't think we need to have a knee-jerk reaction and ban all adoption of Indian children across the world. But at the same time, the mechanism, the law is of course already there, but the mechanism of background checks, especially for children who are going out of the country, because they are going out of the jurisdiction of this country, they are being taken away.
So is that something that needs
must
to be fixed in the law then?
Much more stringent, much more harsh. The law is already there. It provides for a procedure of background check. These are there in the CARA guidelines.
That it is implemented
and now, if there is a problem that has been found with this particular agency, yes, the implementation is something definitely that is very, we have an issue of implementation on on practically all things in India. So implementation is something that we are lacking on all areas, and adoption is also, this is an area where we can take zero chance. When we are talking about the life, well-being of a young child, a small child who can't care for himself, who probably doesn't even have a voice loud enough to be heard by authorities and governance. So here we can't afford to make mistakes. We can't afford to have second chances. So we have to have a system which is so robust and at the same time, provides for enough leverage so these young children, it should not become an obstacle for adoption, but at the same time, it should facilitate right families to adopt the right children.